Hi everyone, welcome to this week's weekly market update. Back after a couple of weeks holiday. There's lots going on in the markets. I think it's been an interesting week so far. We had that tariff talk over the weekend, didn't we? The US proposing, 30% tariffs on Mexico and the EU. So we saw a volatile start to the week, but markets have recovered, sold off a bit yesterday. Interesting to see where it is later on today. Before we get into it, let's just do some of the housekeeping. Let's do the risk warning. Spread bets offered in the UK only, and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 85.24% of retail investor accounts lose money when trading spread bets and CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. All information that's provided during this seminar is for educational purposes only. The presenter is not a financial or investment advisor and is not authorized to provide recommendations on any instrument of any kind as part of this presentation. The strategies showcased are applied on hypothetical scenarios. Any instruments that are mentioned throughout are cited only for illustrative and educational purposes. The webinar is not intended to be a personal recommendation or an offer to buy or sell any financial product or instrument and must not be construed as advice from the presenter. Capital.com does not represent that the material provided here is accurate, current or complete and therefore should not be relied upon as such. Any information that may be provided relating to past performance is not a reliable indicator of future results or performance. To the extent permitted by law, in no event shall Capital.com or any affiliate or employee have any liability for any loss arising from the use of the information provided. Any person acting on the information does so entirely at their own risk. Right, there we go. I think my mic is a bit loud. Let me just try to dial it down a little bit, just in case it's getting a bit distorted at your end. Hopefully that'll be better. Right, let's have a look. So we do this every week and go through the major markets. So stock market indices, commodities, currencies, a little bit of everything, and see where the opportunities might be over the next few days or so. Like I say, it's been an interesting week. I thought we'd start with US indices because this is on the daily. So this is the NASDAQ first of all. So we have seen very briefly yesterday another fresh all-time high for the NASDAQ 100. You know, this market and these markets continue to bounce back from the lows we saw in April. So for me, I mean, I'm still a buyer of the dip of US indices. There's the NASDAQ. Going into this afternoon, I think is interesting. So one thing I'll be watching this afternoon is the lows from Monday. So this was Monday's open. So this was that was Friday's close. So Friday, the NASDAQ closed around 22,750. Then we had that chat about the tariffs over the weekend. So we saw a lower open on Sunday night trade. So it opened only about 100 points lower, 120 points lower than Friday's close, and it recovered. That was Monday. So for me, this afternoon, I'm thinking about being a buyer, and I probably want my stop somewhere underneath Monday's real low. So real low during the actual session for the US, not so much the out of hours. So I think let's call it 22,700. I think will be an interesting one to watch this afternoon. You know, it was a bit weaker yesterday. It did set that fresh all-time high, but it was under pressure for much of yesterday. Let's see if the lows from the week so far holds. But for me, I'd be a buyer. And there's a lot of support left. You know, we'll have a look at the S&P in a minute. But if we stick with the NASDAQ, that's the low for the month so far. So 22,370. Then we got these 22,600 lows from the first week of July. So basically, there's lots of support. So I'm expecting a bit of a snapback after this sell-off, whether that happens today or tomorrow or Friday, who knows. But interesting to see how it all develops. So that's that. If you have a look at the S&P, similar there. There's the 1 day for the S&P, the daily chart for the S&P. So these are the old highs from February. Market sells off, of course. start setting fresh all-time highs end of June, and then very briefly a fresh all-time high yesterday, and here we are. Okay, so on the S&P, again, the S&P has actually traded, is that a new low for the week in the out of hours? So what was the low? The low on Monday's S&P, so it's about the same. Let's call it near 6,200. So I think that's an interesting area to watch this afternoon. So yes, I'm expecting the bounce in US stock markets. I was expecting it yesterday, didn't happen. Let's see what the rest of the week brings. But with markets that set fresh all-time highs just yesterday, by definition, the trend is up, the momentum is strong, and I want to be going with that. So there you go. That's that. Let's see if these US markets manage to bounce back. I think if we start taking out these lows, particularly if we start setting fresh lows for the month, then I would change my opinion. But for now, it's a market that seems strong to me. So that's that. DAX. I am long the DAX actually. I had a good trade on the DAX when I was away. I did do a couple of trades. I bought in here somewhere, 23,800-ish. A couple of weeks ago, and the market did run out. The DAX did run out to fresh all-time highs, so I came out on a trailing stop. I bought back in again. I think it was the end of last week. Yeah, end of last week I bought in. It's been up, it's been down, and it's I think slightly against me at the moment. But the DAX, for me, it's a similar argument to what we're seeing in US markets. Let's flip it over to a daily chart for a second. Look at the bigger picture. We've had the bounce back off the lows. We had the breakout in May to fresh all-time highs. Bit of a wobble. Fresh all-time highs again, the 9th of July, which was this time last week. It's sold off since, so I'm again expecting this market to hook higher. That's why I'm in the trade. So let's see what happens. On the DAX, what was the low? It has again this morning. It did dip below the low for the week. So if we saw a strong finish today, that would be encouraging for me, for my trade. But I'm in the trade, and I'm just being patient to see what happens. The Footsie is a similar one. A bit of sort of, has arguably been a little bit stronger, the Footsie, than some of the other markets. But, all these stock markets are setting fresh all-time highs this week, and that is a positive sign. It's not guaranteed, of course, that markets are going to continue going up. But when a market moves to fresh all-time highs, it shows there is momentum, positive momentum in this market. So here we are on the Footsie. So fresh all-time highs, 10th of July, which was last Thursday. It's wobbled around a bit since then. I think 8,900 has been acting as support on the Footsie. There we go. The lows for the last week or so. It had a dip down this morning to, where did it get to? 89.14, 89.15 this morning, and it's bounced back. So again, let's see if this market can rally from here. So that's that. So European markets, US markets, looking pretty similar. The Japanese market, there we go. That's been strong as well. It's perhaps not quite as clear cut for me as some of these other markets. The all-time highs is it all-time highs? I think it is all-time highs, isn't it? Were set July last year, in the summer of last year. So we're still below those. Let's see what happens. But I think that the trends in the European markets are better for now than in the Japanese market. So that's that. Interesting. So for me, interesting afternoon in US indices. Do we get the bounce? That's what I'll be looking for this afternoon. If we take a look at some other markets, the dollar. I am in this trade as well, actually. This has done well. I found it a bit of a frustrating year trading the dollar index because the trend for the year has absolutely been down. There we go. That's going back to the middle of January. You can see the trend has been down. But I bought it, again, it was last week, just into this little recovery that was chugging along just to see how far it would go. And the problem is, with the little recoveries in the dollar index, they have had a habit of not lasting very long. But this one's been pretty good. And we had the big boost yesterday off the back of the inflation data. So that is a market that's still strong. So when we're seeing a stronger dollar, of course, it has an impact on other markets like gold and silver, which we'll take a look at in a minute, pound against dollar, euro dollar, all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting that the run in the dollar is still going. We're up to like a 3-week high, but there are potentially some big hurdles coming up about 100 points higher than where we are now. So how much there is left in this market remains to be seen. If I wasn't in the trade, I think I'd be a buyer of the dip if it sold off towards yesterday's lows. So interesting. It's been a bit of a quiet day so far after the big moves yesterday, but let's see what happens next with the dollar. But I mean, it's one of these markets where you could make an argument for going long or going short. The argument for going long, the market has been recovering all this month, but if we look at the big picture, we go back to Jan, the market's been sliding. So we have had 6 months of declines in the dollar index from about 110 down to 96 at its lowest. So what's that? Like a 14% drop. Anyway, I'm long. Let's see how long it can carry on for. Let's take a look at gold and silver. I think it's a bit boring, gold. We have a bit of excitement now and again, but the last time we had, let's flip it to a daily, we had an all-time high in gold, because it's been a great year for gold, but we had an all-time high 22nd of April, just shy of $3,500, $3,500 an ounce, and it's been pretty sideways since then, as you can see. So still overall positive. That big trend in gold is still up. So if we saw a much bigger sell-off down to 3,000, I think that'd be interesting from a long-term buy point of view. If we flip it to the hourlies, again, it's a bit sideways, isn't it? There you go. That's the hourlies over the last 6 weeks, and you can see we have short trends, but overall a bit sideways. So I am long-term trend up for gold, not too exciting in the short to medium term for me at the moment, but support over the last 6 weeks around 32.40, 32.50. So I'd be a buyer down there. So just a bit stuck in the middle at the moment. Silver broke out. Silver does have this habit of breaking out and then doing nothing, but we got the breakout in silver. So we had the multi-year highs in silver. Was it the highest since 2014 or something like that? In October last year, up just ahead of $35 an ounce. Came back to it in March, couldn't break it. And then we get the breakout. Get the breakout in early June, all goes a bit sideways, and a breakout again just in the last week. So I'd be a buyer of silver. If as a trend follower, the trend is up. So if I'm going to do anything, I've got to be a buyer. The only question is, where is my stop? And I think for me, again, we're sticking with the hourly chart here. I'd have a stop below all this sideways stuff during June. So the other side of $35 an ounce, maybe. Let's flip it over to an hourly chart. Here we go. So interesting. I'd be a buyer. Let's see what happens. But it's a bit of I've found it over recent years, a bit of a frustrating market, that it looks like it has some momentum, then it just fades and dies and doesn't do anything. But let's see where silver goes. But that breakout this week is over the last week, is definitely positive. Okay, Bitcoin of course broke out as well. Let's flip that. That's on the dailies. So an interesting one in Bitcoin. It felt like it was quite lackluster again. We had the all-time high around $110,000 was set in Jan, drifted back to 75. It had a look through in May, ended up being a false break. It was all going a bit sideways, and then we've had this move over the last week that's seen it go through 110 as high as 125. Is it 123? So again, it's broken out. I'd say it's positive. So so if I had to do anything on Bitcoin, it's a bit harder for us in the UK to trade Bitcoin. But if I had to do anything on Bitcoin, I'd be a buyer. I'd probably want my stop at least the other side of the low for July so far, $105,000 a coin. So that's maybe an interesting trade, But of course that trend is up, In the same way, stock markets hitting all-time highs is positive. Bitcoin hitting all-time highs is positive. A positive move there. expecting that to move higher. Let's see what happens. Crude oil's been a funny market. Crude oil. I think I mentioned probably the last time I was doing this. I was short crude oil, and I got stopped out here 22nd of June. And then the next day the market dumped, and of course that just happens now and again. And it's been fairly uneventful since then compared to the moves we had seen in May and June. It's been a fairly quiet time. Although again we're seeing some relatively big swings. If we look at like the hourlies for oil, so that was where I got stopped on my short, and then the market dumped. But it had been trying to trend higher. But it's all a bit sideways, isn't it? It did, just yesterday, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, it traded up to 68.50, which was its best levels in about 3 weeks. But it's promptly turned round and tanked. We've seen it, it's moved, $3.50 just in the last day or so. So it's a sizable move. There's big support for oil, down around 63.80, 64, but again, it's a bit sideways, isn't it? An interesting afternoon, an interesting couple of days to see if we see the buyers come in. But a bit of an uneventful market after a great run, really off the April lows. Down at 55, up to 75, and then a bit sort of directionless overall over the last few weeks or so. But let's see if we see this sort of 64 area bring the buyers out again. Natural gas, I haven't looked at that for a while, natural gas, so let's take a look at that. So on the dailies, see, that's the last, 6, 7, 8 months or so. It's pretty sideways, isn't it? It is it's a sideways market. It's stuck in a range. I'd say overall the bias is still towards the upside. We do get good runs along the way, but it's pretty directionless, isn't it? I'd say from that bigger picture point of view. Let's flip it down to the hourlies. We'd had a downtrend, and now we've got a bit of an uptrend. So, but yeah, it's not too exciting for me, that one, given what's been going on for all of this year and back to December. It's all a bit sideways. We'll have a look at pound against the dollar, because we had UK inflation data out this morning, came in slightly higher than expected, the UK inflation data. I think it's interesting, pound against the dollar. Of course, we have had this dollar strength all the way through July, and if we're going to get dollar strength, it's going to push down the likes of the pound, the likes of the euro, the likes of gold, etc. So we've seen the pound against the dollar drop from about 138 beginning in July to 134-ish at the moment. So we've seen a 400-point drop. But what's interesting is the trend in the pound had been up for most of this year, because, of course, the trend in the dollar had been down, so it's going to be inverse. And this 134, 133.70, 134 area is, I think, an interesting one, or is interesting for me anyway, because it was the low before the market ran out to those highs. Was around about here. So basically, if it's going to bounce from anywhere, here we are. Let's see. So I think it's been a fairly quiet day today. Let's flip this over to the hourlies. So we had a fairly quiet day today. But let's see what happens. Do we see the pound perhaps try and make a base here over the next day or so? So it could be an interesting trade for me later in the week if we do see it stop falling, basically. Does this 133.70-ish area end up being a base? And of course it does tie in with the trend for the year so far, which is that, and it is oversold. So for fans of the RSI, if you look down here, it's gone oversold the last couple of days. The last time it was oversold, we've got to go back to Jan of this year, so we've got to go back 6 months. Let's see how it all works out. But I think that's an interesting market to watch, I think, for the rest of this week. So for me, the interesting markets are US stock market indices and pound against the dollar to see what happens. And I think that's it. I'll have a look at the stuff you want looking at now. If there's anything you want looking at, if you put it in the chat. But so stock market's overall positive, all-time highs this week. That's a positive for me. Bitcoin, positive, all-time highs. Gold and silver. Silver's positive because it broke out. Gold's a bit boring. Pound against the dollar. I think is another interesting market. But let's take a look at the stuff you want looking at. Someone's mentioned MIN, M-I-N, on the ASX, which is the old what's it, isn't it? The Aussie. Is it that one, isn't it? Mineral Resources. It must be that one. Let's add that. Oh, it's on our charts anyway. We must have looked at that the other week. Let's have a look. Where is it? Let me find it. MIN AU. There we go. So we looked at that. So I drew that little line the last time we looked at it. So what would I have said last time? I would have said that the trend was down from Jan 23, wasn't it? So that was down. The latest bit of the trend runs from May last year. Is it breaking out? Is the question. So I probably would have said no a couple of weeks ago. But, there is, if you look at it now, we have these old highs at 26 Aussie dollars. Had a little look through in May. We did have a higher low. And it's had a push through again. So maybe Mineral Resources, Aussie quoted stock, is starting to turn the corner. I'd be quite happy to give it a bit more time. But, I'm going to have to maybe start revising my opinion on that and think that perhaps this is on the turn, Mineral Resources. If I was a buyer today, I would probably want my stop below that June low, which is down at 1840, that sort of area. But I think that's an interesting one. What would be interesting for me, if it pulls back, how far does a pullback go? And then look to be a buyer with a stop the other side of that 18 level. So that is interesting that it's broken out again. It's a bit overbought in the short term. Let's see. Let's come back to that in a couple of weeks and see where we are. Estee Lauder. Let's have a look at that one. Estee Lauder. Extended hours. Okay, let's add that to charts. So US stock. Let's have a look at that on the dailies. Oof. Is that a daily? That is a daily, isn't it? Well, that's not been a very good investment, is it? That did really well. Where did it all change? Jan 22. So about 3 years ago. So 3 years ago it was $370 a share, and it's dropped 70%, more than 70% since then. That's taken a real beating, isn't it? It's an interesting one. Anyway, let's have a look at let's just chuck some trend lines on and stuff. So I suppose with markets like this is like, well, do you think the trend is ending? Is that? It's poking out the trend line, isn't it? I'm always tempted when something pokes out the trend line to assume it's a false break first of all. So I'd be tempted to still go short. But it's interesting. We've had. When did that rally start? Off the April low. So we've had a couple of months of rally. So for me, I would go, right, I'd still be going short. I would say, right, it's been a great rally, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of the trend just yet, the end of the downtrend just yet. So for me, if I was going short, what would I do here? What's that? 103. That's quite a wide stop, isn't it? 103. Can I actually trade this now? Should we put a little trade on? 103. What's that level there? 94, 95, 94 is the high. Should we go short? 94, 17. Okay, let's see. I don't know if I can do it because the market's not open yet. Let's put a stop loss in. Let's put a stop loss at 97. Stop loss. 97. How much can I risk? If I sell 786 shares, I'm going to be losing £6,000. It's a bit too much. So let's sell. If I do 50, if I go short 50 shares, I go 400 quid risk. There we go. Sell. Go. Done. There we go. I'm short 50 Estee Lauder. So I'm taking the view that this recovery is going to run out of steam. That's my view. But I think if we start pushing much higher, I change my mind. And perhaps we are seeing a turnaround in that longer term trend. So have a look in here. Where's the Estee Lauder? There it is. So I'm sure Estee Lauder. Let's see. We'll come back to that. Let's see how we're doing on that. But that's an interesting one again, because it's been such a massive sell-off over those 3 years. And I think that the temptation is always when we get a bit of a run, think, oh, this is the end of the downtrend. But my bet at the moment is it isn't the end of the downtrend. Let's come back to it in the next couple of weeks and see. I think if it pushes through like 104, even I would have to admit that downtrend looks like it's over. But let's come back to it and see what happens. Very overbought and a bit messy on the RSI, but let's see where it is. So thanks for that. It was an interesting one. Oil, we had a look at oil. I don't know if you're joining late there. We had a look at oil. It's a bit boring, to be honest, oil. That's the last few weeks on oil, all a bit sideways. Weak today. We have seen support around $64 a barrel for oil, so about $1 lower than where we are now. Let's see what happens. It's an interesting one to watch for the rest of this week, but it's quite the turnaround since just a couple of days ago, where it was at its best levels for a few weeks, and it's been slammed since. So interesting to see if it snaps back. If I was a betting man, I would be looking to buy oil when it stops sliding, but still weak today. That's it really, isn't it? So so for me, stock markets, because US markets in particular, because of the all-time highs this week. Do we get the bounce back as the week goes on? I'd be leaning towards yes and looking to be a buyer, so I think that's interesting. Dollar index, because it has had a good run this month and a boost yesterday off the inflation numbers. Does that carry on? It's perhaps looking a bit overstretched in the short term. And then off the back of that, pound against the dollar, because we're back to this 134 level, which had been important in the past. So a few bits and pieces to watch. We'll wrap things up there. Thanks for coming along. We'll do this again next week. It might be on Tuesday next week, because I've got a friend's wedding, I think, on the Wednesday. I need to check my diary. So if you're subscribed anyway and you got your notifications switched on, you'll get notified when it goes live. And of course, if you're not here live, the recording's available later on. But thanks for coming along today. Thanks for the questions. Some interesting markets there to look at. Let's see where that Estee Lauder is in a week's time. But we'll wrap things up there. So until the next time, good luck with your trading.